Hi, I'm B News producer Sydney Bowles, and you're watching another episode of our monthly Superintendent Update, joined, of course, by Superintendent Dr. Eric Conti. Dr. Conti, thanks for being here.
Hi, Sydney.
So much to discuss, as we were just discussing before we started rolling. It is, in fact, April, which is wild. But I want to start this month with the announcement of a new pilot project here at the high school, a new collaborative care project, which I was watching the school committee meeting where this was discussed. I got to say, I feel like I kind of get it, but not totally. So maybe I can have you start with the 101, what is it that we're piloting here?
And I might be closer to your position. I kind of get it and can't explain everything. I think that insurance companies are looking for ways to expand the opportunity to provide more mental health services that they're seeing sort of an exploding need of in our communities. So instead of waiting for schools to refer students for mental health services and then having the families coordinate those mental health services independently, or instead of the district having to hire more mental health professionals, which we may or may not be able to, and providing those services directly, I think what they're looking to do is really partner with schools to provide a coordinator on site that is paid for by the healthcare provider and a clinician, and then have the families work with that individual in a coordinated care model where, again, the referral would come from the school or through the school. Parents would be involved. They would need to make sure that everyone sort of had consent, and then there'd be a case manager to try to coordinate that care and service, ultimately to get the student the care that they needed, with the real goal of making sure the student can remain in school or come back to school as soon as possible and be successful.
So what we're talking about here is an alternative or additional way to provide mental health services to students in school, essentially.
Yeah, it's an expanded way to do that. Some of the care could take place outside of school, obviously, but it would also allow the schools to benefit from insurance the family may have that would provide coverage for these services.
Are there things to consider about students who have no insurance, or students who, who like making sure that the student's insurance is, that the provider can take any given student's insurance?
Well, I think that would be the case manager's job to do that, and many of our students who are underinsured or are on Mass Health, so they would coordinate this through Mass Health. So I think it's an expanded opportunity for us to get more students more care, and then for us to work with families, because health issues typically, again, don't stop at the schoolhouse door, right? They're usually coming from home or going back to home, and it's when we're partnering with families when we're most successful. And I think that would be sort of what this care model really tries to do, is create partnerships and really create, again, a case managed coordinator who's connected both to school and to home, and keeping everyone sort of on the same page.
Are there privacy concerns with this when you're talking about one person coordinating all these different?
Well, again, there would need to be consent, and then the system that is used is the same system where if you went to your primary care physician, I'm assuming you have like I do, one of those websites where all your information is at. So again, it's all protected, and it's a system that's utilized, and all these referrals are going to happen through a doctor's office, so it's going to be very similar to there. It's not going to be a file in a school or on a, it's going to be, again, the care is going to be delivered through doctor's offices and through, I think it was the Brookline Center for Mental Health, so we'll be utilizing those services, just that care will be coordinated through a case manager here at school.
Does this have implications for our currently employed mental health staffers? Staff members?
I think it has implications in that it may balance out some of their caseload. I think they're all sort of fully booked, and we're hoping to reach more kids, is kind of what we're trying to do. Are you saying, are we doing this instead of their services? The answer is no. and I think there's a need to expand their services and to complement those services. I'm not sure we're going to be able to hire enough bodies to cover the needs that we have.
Right.
And I'm not, more and more of these needs, basic needs, are also falling on schools.
Yeah.
So we're providing, in many cases, the first exposure to immunizations, physicals, and again, working with the Board of Health, who has been remarkably supportive of the effort to get our students immunized. And then obviously the mental health issues that students need and have. So a larger burden of that is falling on schools and public education, and this is, I think, a way of trying to get some reimbursement through insurance companies to expand those services.
Yeah. So this is a pilot that's starting at the high school. What was the thought process around starting it here as opposed to any of the other buildings?
I think demand here. Again, if I can speak in real generalities, typically with we get to know students obviously early as learners, and typically we'll see learning disabilities or learning challenges first as the child matures. Even if the learning challenges have been addressed or accommodated, what we'll often see is as students get older, more of the disabilities involve mental health, anxieties, other things. So it may not be an academic issue, it may be a mental health issue. So I think it was a natural fit for us to look at the high school. And again, I think with existing caseloads and demand, it was also a level where we felt we could have an impact. And again, if the technicalities of this run smoothly, then we're hoping it might be something that we can continue to expand. It's a relatively new, I'm not aware of any other district in Massachusetts that is running something like this, but there may be, so I don't ever want to say we're doing this, whatever. But I do think it was an interesting way to expand our services. So I think we're going to try it.
Yeah. Can you give me a sense for the timeline? Is it starting now, starting next school year? What's the...
We're going to try to start next school year. I think Ms. Concession, our Director of Mental Health, is sort of working on this more directly. And if you want more of a follow-up, I think she would be a great interview to do that. I think we're going to try to hire a case manager and someone, mental health position, again, through this outside agency, and get them on staff. We're thinking that may take some of the spring and even into the summer. We really like to prioritize someone who has multi-language skills that would help our population. And again, if, like everything else, hiring is more challenging than normal. So it may take us some time, but we'd really like to have this start next school year.
Awesome. Shall we transition to talking about budget?
Yeah.
Another thrilling topic, but an important one. So 67.5 million for the superintendent's draft budget, I think.
Okay.
Got to wrestle that down. Came in above guidelines, which is the goal, right? You talk about this every time we talk about the budget. This is the way that you do it. The way that we do it in Burlington is you present a higher budget than you know is reasonable, and then you wrestle it down. How do you wrestle it down? I feel like there's no way not to do that where you don't end up the bad guy trying to figure out what of all these, how you're going to prioritize things.
Well, again, that's part of the job, and you try to do it collaboratively, but I think when I first started, people said there was too much, if all these reductions happened behind closed doors, then there was too much agreement at the end. They wanted to see the, as I say, the sausage being made.
That's remarkable. That's a remarkable...
That's kind of what we're doing it in public, so we'll make some reductions moving down. I also think the school committee wanted to hear directly from building principals and directors to make sure that they were hearing what their needs are, because if not fulfilled this budget, there may be an opportunity next budget. Our needs tend not to go away year to year, even though the budget has to be established year to year. So I think that's it. Obviously, this is a contract year for us, which is a big variable in the budget. So we're also concurrent to budgeting. We're also in negotiations with actually 5 of our 6 unions. We have settled with the instructional assistants into next year. So we have a lot going on.
Yeah, I think it seems like the personnel cost is always going to be the biggest number here. But we talked about this last year too. I'm just so struck by the beast that is inflation in this conversation, where we all know from our personal finances that it really does take a number on how much you're able to do with the same amount of money. So how do you talk to principals and program managers about that? What kinds of conversations are you having?
Well, they know how much their supplies are needed and cost, so they do that. But I think you're right. So every school budget in every place I've ever worked is typically 85% personnel, 10% fixed costs, heat, light, electricity, and about 5% discretionary. So you can't even cut discretionary spending and sort of meet the need. You always have to look at other things. And so it's just a matter of trying to do more with some of the inflationary costs that are built in. Sometimes we're trying to do things smarter. We're trying to consolidate where we can. But again, a concrete example of that inflation would be our bus contract for the same level of service next year is going to be a 16% increase over the cost of this year. So that's a built-in inflationary hit on the budget. And again, I want to make sure too, we are getting more money, which is again in this community is very generous. So I don't want to sit here.
4.5% increase over last year is the guideline. Is that right?
It is a guideline, and again, that's what we're working with. School committee doesn't need to necessarily accept that, but I'm saying I think that's the guideline we're working with, which is a very generous increase. So I never want to have anyone say that I'm ungrateful or believe that this community doesn't support schools, because that's just untrue. They are very generous. And it is, people are used to, though, high levels of service, small class sizes. And so if they want to see those services, programs, and class sizes remain, then again, our costs are going up like everyone else's. Speaking of staffing a little bit, I was really struck. I know I'm picking out one piece from the conversations that have been had about budget. So this is going to be missing some of that other context. But middle school principal Carrie Purchase was in front of the school committee recently talking about the middle school needs that she's hoping to ask for in the budget in terms of staffing. And it's a lot. It was an additional English language teacher, an additional counselor, 2 additional classroom teachers, a math instructional specialist. There's a lot of sort of staffing needs that they're hoping for. And I don't know that I saw that at the other buildings. Is there something specific about the middle school that is needing more services just because there's more students or an increase in students or needs? Or am I misreading that? No, I think we have a large 7th and 8th grade class. So I think the point that Dr. Purchase was making is the enrollment of the middle school across grades 6, 7, and 8 is really not that much different from the enrollment at the high school, which is grades 9 through 12. And if you look at the resources at the high school, she needed to see some similar type of resources at the middle school. So I think that was the sort of the context and the case that she was making, which is sort of very clear. The structures of the school buildings are very different, and don't want to get super technical, but the middle school sort of operates as 9 separate schools because of the team-based approach. The high school is more of a, where traditional high school where you create more sections by adding staff. So the solutions are a little bit different, but I think what she was saying is, boy, we have enrollment of roughly equal size. I'd like to see some of the same resources in place.
Okay, last question on the budget thing. Separate from the budget, of course, we're coming up on May town meeting, which is where you all get to ask for capital project requests. I know you've got a list of more than a dozen items that are ideal, maybe not all going to get funded. Do you have a favorite or one that you're most excited about or passionate about in this year's requests?
I am, and I would say these aren't nice to haves. These are needed in our capital budget, and they largely have to do with building needs. Again, we're trying to maintain, 900,000 square feet, close to 1 million square feet of building space. So my favorite, though, is actually relatively low on the list, and I'm not sure why. It shows you the influence I have. It's the curriculum work that Dr. Chen is asking for. It's been a long time since we've really taken a good hard look at our curriculum, and that's looking at it from a sequence really from preschool all the way to grade 12, and to make sure that we're aligned with state standards, to make sure all kids are accessing our advanced courses to make sure that how a kid sort of comes into the district doesn't limit their choices. So it really is critical, because that's what schools do, right? That's our primary responsibility. And I think taking a step back, investing in that, those investments, even though those dollars will be spent in a relatively short period of time, those investments will be something that increases capacity and the district will utilize for 10 years moving forward. So I'm really most excited about the work, and that involves lots of educators, so teachers, instructional assistants, it involves principals, building leaders, central office staff. Getting everyone on the same page is critical for us to move forward.
Last question for you. We're starting spring sports. Any words of encouragement for the athletes heading into this season?
Just, I would say they have a great fall and a great winter sort of standard to meet. So I think not only in terms of performance, but in character. And I think we always try to stress both for our team. So I was excited to speak to all the spring sports teams and coaches, I think a couple weeks ago, and to kick off the season. And you know, we have great kids and our coaches are phenomenal, and it's exciting for me to see them outside. I'm a big fan of spring, so it's nice to finally see daylight driving home instead of dark most days. So I think, again, I want them to have fun, I want them to compete hard, and I want them to compete with character.
Okay. Superintendent Eric Conti, thank you as always. I'm Sydney Bowles. You've been watching B News Superintendent Update. Thanks for tuning in.